Ukraine launches a coordinated counterattack on March 8, 2026, along an 18-kilometer sector that Russian forces had been consolidating for 11 weeks, and the NATO weapons package that enables it is not the one either side expected. Saturday, March 8, 2026. The Kreminna sector had been a problem since December in a specific and operationally frustrating way. Not because Russian forces were advancing, and not because Ukrainian forces were losing ground, but because the sector had stabilized into a condition of functional equilibrium that Russian command was actively managing, and Ukrainian command could not break without a resource commitment it had not been able to justify, while higher priority axes were consuming available precision strike allocation. The Russian defensive footprint in the sector was not a single line. It was a dispersed presence. 11 separate strongpoints distributed across a wide front, each strongpoint self-contained, each connected to the others by a resupply network that used 7 different route variations to avoid the pattern of life targeting that had attrited Russian logistics on more consolidated fronts. The dispersal was deliberate. A consolidated line is targetable. 11 dispersed strongpoints, each one too small to justify the precision strike allocation that a larger target warrants, each one too capable to be taken by infantry assault without fire support, each one too scattered for a single ground assault to address. Create a targeting problem that is essentially economic. The cost of prosecuting 11 separate strongpoints exceeds the operational value of reducing the sector's defensive capacity by 11/11s. Russian planners in the Kreminna sector had read the targeting economics correctly. The equilibrium was holding because breaking it cost more than maintaining it. What changed in late February was not Ukrainian resources or Russian vulnerability. What changed was the NATO logistics package that arrived at the Ukrainian 57th Motorized Infantry Brigade sector on February 24th, a delivery that had been requested in January and whose contents had been negotiated through the NATO capability coordination process for 6 weeks before the final manifest was confirmed. The manifest included items that the brigade's operations cell had requested and items that the NATO planning advisors had added based on their assessment of what the Kreminna sector's targeting problem actually required. The brigade had requested additional HIMARS rockets, additional Excalibur rounds, and replacement optics for 2 Leopard 2A4 tanks that had sustained sensor damage in a January engagement. The NATO advisors had added, without prior discussion with the brigade, 8 bonus anti-armor sensor-fused munitions for the Archer's self-propelled howitzers, a replacement data terminal for the brigade's artillery fire control network that would reduce its coordinate processing time, and the item that the operations cell had not requested because it had not known to request it: access credentials and operator training for the JANUS Joint Fires Coordination software that NATO artillery units in Estonia and Poland had been using since 2024, but that had not been extended to Ukrainian formations. The JANUS software did not add weapons. It added coordination capacity, the ability to sequence fire missions from multiple artillery systems against multiple simultaneous targets without the manual deconfliction process that had been adding between 8 and 14 minutes to Ukrainian multi-system fire missions. 8 to 14 minutes of deconfliction delay had been, in the Kreminna sector's specific targeting problem, the difference between prosecutable and impractical. An isolated Strongpoints crew that has 8 to 14 minutes between a targeting decision in a fire mission has time to disperse. A targeting sequence that can execute against multiple Strongpoints simultaneously, removing the dispersal option from all of them at the same moment, changes the economics of the problem. The operations cell spent 4 days working the JANUS software against the Kreminna sector's 11 Strongpoints. The targeting packages it built used the AGS surveillance data and Puma UAV passes to establish activity windows. The periods when each Strongpoint's crew was most likely to be in their primary positions rather than dispersed in the surrounding terrain, and cross-correlated the 11 Strongpoints activity windows to identify a 2-hour overlap period when all 11 could be assessed with reasonable confidence as occupied. The overlap window was 3 a.m. to 5 a.m., the shift change, the resupply rotation, the moment when Strongpoint crews were in transition between defensive states and could be assessed with higher probability than at any other time of day as being at their primary positions. The March 8th strike package was submitted to Ukrainian Operational Command at 11 p.m. on March 7th, with a planned execution time of 3:30 a.m. If you were the Ukrainian Operations Cell Commander approving the March 8th strike package, what is the single planning assumption that concerns you most? The one whose failure would collapse the package's effectiveness without negating its execution. Type A, if it's the activity window prediction, 11 Strongpoints cruise simultaneously at primary positions during a 2-hour overlap is a statistical assessment, not a confirmed position fix, and 3 or 4 Strongpoints whose crews happen to be dispersed during the execution window will survive the strike and constitute the residual defensive problem. Type C, if it's the JANUS coordination, the software has not been used by this formation in a live fire sequence against simultaneous targets, and a coordination failure during the execution window that delays 2 or 3 fire missions by even 4 minutes reintroduces the dispersal window the software was supposed to eliminate. Drop your risk assessment in the comments. The Archer battery opened its first fire mission at 3:31 a.m. The JANUS software was coordinating fire missions from the Archer, 2 M109A5 Paladin batteries, and the HIMARS element simultaneously. 9 separate fire missions against 9 of the 11 Strongpoints in the first 2-minute sequence. The 2 Strongpoints excluded from the first sequence were the northernmost and southernmost positions on the 18-kilometer sector. Their locations made them accessible to a second sequence without the deconfliction geometry that would have required the first sequence to be restructured. The first sequence ran from 3:31 a.m. to 3:33 a.m., 9 fire missions, 2 minutes. The JANUS deconfliction processing time was 11 seconds per mission sequence, compared to the 8 to 14-minute manual process it replaced. The bonus anti-armor sensor-fused munitions went to the 2 Strongpoints assessed as having armored vehicle presence. The Archer fired 4 bonus rounds against 2 separate aim points. Bonus munitions are not direct-fire weapons. Each round releases 2 submunitions at altitude that scan the ground below with infrared and millimeter wave sensors, identify armored vehicle heat signatures, and attack the vehicle's top armor, the thinnest point, with a self-forged fragment. The 2 Strongpoints with armored presence each had 1 vehicle signature confirmed by AGS thermal in the activity window. Both were struck. Puma confirmation of the 2 vehicle positions at 3:41 a.m. showed secondary detonations at both aim points. The armor at both Strongpoints was gone before either crew had time to mount and displace. Subscribe and hit the bell. Every breakdown here runs to this level of operational detail on the weapons and the decisions. The 9 fire missions from the first JANUS sequence produced a mixed result. 6 of 9 Strongpoints showed confirmed impact effects on the Puma feed, destroyed primary position structures, crew casualties assessed from thermal movement patterns, or absence of return fire from positions that had been active on the Ukrainian fire control network's threat display. 3 of 9 showed indeterminate results. The Puma operator could not confirm the positions had been struck effectively, either because the impact was outside the primary position area or because crew dispersion before the strike had removed the thermal signatures that would confirm personnel presence at time of impact. 3 surviving Strongpoints from a 9-position first sequence was within the planning estimate. The operations cell had assessed that a 20 to 30% non-confirmation rate was probable given the statistical basis of the activity window prediction. The second JANUS sequence targeting the 2 excluded northern and southern positions, plus the 3 indeterminate first sequence positions, ran from 3:38 a.m. to 3:40 a.m. 4 of the 5 second sequence missions produced confirmed effects. 1 northern sector Strongpoint remained indeterminate after both sequences. 10 of 11 Strongpoints had been struck with confirmed or probable effect. 1 Strongpoint was intact. The ground element had been at its start line since 3:08 a.m. 3 battle groups, a mechanized element of 6 Leopard 2A4 tanks and 12 CV-90s on the northern axis, a lighter motorized element of 8 M100 and dismounted infantry on the central axis where the terrain restricted armored movement, and a reserve element of 4 Leopard 2A4s and 4 Bradleys positioned behind the central axis to exploit either flank depending on where the first 2 battle groups created the most favorable conditions. The ground element crossed at 3:44 a.m. 3 minutes after the second JANUS sequence completed. The northern axis moved towards 7 strongpoints that had been struck. The central axis moved toward 3. The intact strongpoint, the one that had returned indeterminate results from both strike sequences, was on the northern axis's left flank. The northern axis's first contact came at 3:58 a.m., a T-72B3 that had survived the bonus strike at the northernmost strongpoint. The bonus round had struck the vehicle's rear deck rather than its top armor. The submunition's self-forged fragment had penetrated the engine compartment, but had not disabled the vehicle. The T-72 was mobile. Its main gun was functional. It engaged the lead Leopard 2A4 at 1,200 meters. The terrain on the northern axis was open enough for a direct engagement at this range, and the T-72 crew had assessed correctly that the approaching Leopard formation was moving without the immediate knowledge that an operational vehicle was ahead of them. The T-72's first round missed. The miss was 11 meters to the right, a ranging miss, not an aiming error. The Leopard's Attica thermal sight acquired the T-72 at 3:58 a.m. in 42 seconds. The Leopard's 120mm round was fired 3 seconds after acquisition. The T-72 was destroyed at 3:58 a.m. in 45 seconds, 3 seconds from acquisition to destruction. The bonus failure, the submunition that struck the engine rather than the top armor, had produced a vehicle that survived the strike but could not survive the engagement that followed because its ranging miss had given the Leopard's thermal sight the acquisition geometry it needed. Sometimes a weapon fails and produces a worse outcome for the side that survived it than the intended kill would have generated. By 4:47 a.m., the northern axis had cleared 6 of its 7 assigned strongpoint positions, 4 destroyed by direct fire from the Leopards, 2 cleared by dismounted CV-90 infantry, who found the positions already degraded by the earlier artillery strike and reduced to 1 or 2 surviving crew members. The 7th, the intact strongpoint that had returned indeterminate results from both JANUS sequences, was the final contact. The northern axis ground element reached its approach at 4:51 a.m. The Puma operator had been tracking the position since 3:31 a.m. and had confirmed crew activity throughout. This was a position whose crew had been in their primary fighting positions during both strike sequences and had not been engaged effectively by either. The Puma feed showed 3 crew members in the primary position structure and a 4th at the communication trench entrance. The Leopard 2A4 at the front of the northern axis formation engaged the primary position structure at 4:53 a.m. with a single 120mm round. The position was destroyed. The 4th crew member in the communication trench survived the impact and was taken prisoner at 5:04 a.m. He was the only surviving crew member of the position that had returned indeterminate results from both strike sequences. Not because the strikes had missed, but because the crew had been in position and had survived the strikes entirely, through the specific geometry of where they had been sitting when the rounds impacted. 11 positions, 10 struck with confirmed effect. 1 survived both strikes, all 11 cleared by 5:04 a.m. What does the 1 surviving strongpoint, the position whose crew was present during both strike sequences and survived both unengaged, tell you about the limits of activity window prediction as a targeting methodology when the goal is simultaneous multi-position suppression? Type A, if it confirms that statistical activity window prediction will always produce a non-zero residual. Some positions will be occupied, both sequences will impact outside the primary crew areas, and the ground assault must be planned to handle residual positions as a structural feature of the operation rather than a planning failure. Type C if it points to a specific intelligence gap, the difference between a thermal signature that confirms crew presence and a thermal signature that confirms crew position within the strong point. And the solution is higher resolution collection on each position rather than broader cross-correlation of 11 activity windows. Drop your full read in the comments. The central axis cleared its 3 assigned positions between 4:02 a.m. and 5:11 a.m. The M130s and dismounted infantry found 2 of the 3 positions degraded by the JANUS strike sequence, 1 position abandoned, its crew having withdrawn before the ground element arrived, and 1 position with 2 survivors who surrendered without resistance when the infantry reached the perimeter. The third position on the central axis had not been in the JANUS first or second sequence. It was an auxiliary position that AGS had identified the previous day, but that had not been in the original 11 Strongpoint targeting package because the activity window correlation had not confirmed crew presence with sufficient confidence during the 3:15 a.m. window. The auxiliary position opened fire on the approaching M113 column at 4:39 a.m. with a PKM machine gun and an RPG-7. One M113 took an RPG hit that immobilized it without crew casualties. The infantry dismounted and reduced the auxiliary position at 4:51 a.m. with direct fire. 2 Russian soldiers killed, 1 captured. The M113 was recovered at 5:30 a.m. The auxiliary position was the one element of the Kreminna sector's dispersed defensive architecture that the targeting package had not fully addressed. Not because of an intelligence failure, but because its activity window correlation had not crossed the confidence threshold. The threshold that separates a targetable position from a position the ground assault handles directly is a planning decision, not a technology decision. The operations cell had set that threshold conservatively. The immobilized M113 was the cost of the conservatism. There were no Ukrainian fatalities in the Kreminna sector counterattack. The reserve element had not been committed by 5:30 a.m. The northern and central axes had cleared their assigned positions within the planning timeline. The reserve's 4 Leopards and 4 Bradleys crossed the line of departure at 5:35 a.m. to begin the exploitation phase, moving through the cleared sector into the terrain behind the former Strongpoint line, toward the Russian logistics and command nodes that the AGS surveillance had been mapping for 8 weeks. The exploitation phase was not a new operation. It was the continuation of the same operation through the gap that the 11 Strongpoint positions had been holding closed for 11 weeks. The weapons opened the gap. The software coordinated the weapons. The reserve element was what moved through it. The Kreminna sector counterattacks accounting at 6:08 a.m. on March 8th, all 11 Strongpoints cleared, 1 Russian armored vehicle destroyed by direct fire after bonus submunition, partial effect, 0 Ukrainian fatalities, 1 M113 immobilized and recovered, 23 Russian soldiers taken prisoner, estimated 31 killed in action across all 11 positions. The JANUS software's 11-second coordination time against the manual process's 8 to 14 minutes had eliminated the dispersal window for 10 of 11 positions. The 11th was cleared by a Leopard 2A4's 120mm gun at 4:53 a.m. The equilibrium that had held the Kreminna sector for 11 weeks was gone by 5:04 a.m. What the Russian operational command at the Kreminna sector level received at 5:30 a.m. was a situation report whose content was, in the most direct summary available, that the 11 Strongpoint dispersed defensive architecture that had held the sector since December had been cleared in 89 minutes, and that the Ukrainian reserve element was now moving through the gap. The dispersal strategy that had been the Kreminna sector's tactical answer to Ukrainian precision strike economics had encountered a coordination tool that changed the economics. The 11 Strongpoints had been individually too small to justify the precision strike allocation required to address them. The JANUS software made them collectively addressable in a 2-minute sequence. The individual targeting economics that the dispersal strategy relied on were gone the moment the coordination bottleneck was removed. The Russian response force request that was transmitted from Kreminna Sector Command at 5:30 a.m. was approved at the operational level at 5:47 a.m., 17 minutes after the request. The response force was at its assembly point. Its route to the sector had been the route that Russian logistics had used for resupply runs for 11 weeks. The Puma operator, who had been tracking the sector since 3 a.m., picked up the response force's vehicle movement at 5:52 a.m. The HIMARS battery had not expended its full allocation in the 3:31 a.m. sequence. It fired at 5:54 a.m. The response force did not reach the sector. 3 questions from the Kreminna sector operation that the exploitation phase, the reserve element moving through the gap at 5:35 a.m., will have to answer before the next planning cycle. First, the JANUS software reduced fire mission coordination time from 8 to 14 minutes to 11 seconds, changing the targeting economics of 11 dispersed strongpoints from individually impractical to collectively addressable in a 2-minute sequence. If Russian defensive doctrine adapts in the next consolidation phase by increasing the number of dispersed positions, not 11 but 30 or 40, does the JANUS coordination advantage scale with the number of positions? Or does a larger simultaneous sequence introduce new deconfliction constraints that restore some of the coordination delay that the software eliminated? Second, the bonus anti-armor sensor-fused munitions produced 1 confirmed vehicle kill and 1 partial effect survival that led to a direct engagement 3 seconds after acquisition. The partial effect was a geometry failure. Submunition struck engine rear rather than top armor. What does the partial effect incident tell us about the conditions under which Bonus's top attack profile is reliable versus the conditions under which the submunition's sensor-to-impact geometry requires the vehicle to be stationary and open-top exposed? And how does that reliability profile interact with a targeting window built around a shift change activity period when vehicle crews are most likely to be in transition between stationary and mobile states? Third, 0 Ukrainian fatalities across the entire 89-minute operation. Is this a reproducible outcome of the JANUS coordination advantage, eliminating the residual defensive capacity before the ground element closed, or a specific result of a particular strongpoint architecture that did not include the ATGM coverage and layered anti-armor defense that higher density Russian defensive sectors carry? And does the answer determine whether the Kreminna sector template is a model or a special case? Drop your full analysis in the comments. Like the video if this breakdown was worth your time, subscribe, hit the bell, and leave your assessment of whether the JANUS coordination advantage is a one-cycle surprise or a structural shift in how NATO weapons enable Ukrainian combined arms. The next breakdown is already in production,